For more than 2 years, I learned how to smile while hiding bruises no one was ever supposed to see. I believed escaping my husband would take months because he controlled my money, my career, and almost every part of my life. Then my uncle came home after 14 years overseas. He looked at me for less than 10 seconds, saw what everyone else had missed, and by the very next morning, the first cracks began spreading through the perfect life my husband had spent years building. My name is Tamsin Vale, and this is the story of the day I finally stopped protecting the man who was destroying me. Chapter 1. The Bruises No One Saw. By the first week of July 2025, Charlotte was already brushing 90 degrees before noon, but I still crossed the marble lobby of our South Park high-rise in a long-sleeved cardigan. Mrs. Porter from 22 greeted me beside the mailboxes and told me I looked polished as always. The concierge asked whether Graham and I were still attending the building's summer wine night. A neighbor I barely knew smiled and said I was lucky to have a husband who still opened doors for me after nearly 6 years of marriage. I smiled back because that was what I had trained myself to do. No one saw the dark mark beneath my left sleeve. No one knew I had spent more than 2 years learning how to listen for Graham's key in the lock and tell from the speed of his footsteps what kind of evening I was about to have. My phone vibrated before the elevator reached our floor. "Everything okay?" That was all Graham had written. Anyone else would have read concern. I read the question underneath it. Why had it taken me 7 minutes to get from the garage to the elevator? I checked whether location sharing was still active. I looked at the grocery receipt in my bag and confirmed the timestamp. I replayed the short conversation I had just had with Mrs. Porter. I checked my messages in case there was something Graham could misunderstand later. There was nothing. There was often nothing. That had never stopped him from finding something. Our condo was worth a little over $500,000. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, pale hardwood floors, and a balcony overlooking a stretch of Charlotte that glittered after dark. Graham Vale was the director of client development at Hartwell Infrastructure Group. He remembered the names of doormen, servers, and junior employees. He sent thank you notes. He spoke about me as if I were the center of his life. People liked him quickly. That was one of his greatest talents. My name is Tamsin Calloway Vale, though most people called me Tam. I was 36 and worked in a back-office position at Blue Haven Credit Union, earning $61,500 a year. I used to be a senior financial analyst at Meridian Assurance. I made close to $94,000 and had been preparing for a promotion that would have put a team under me. Graham had encouraged me to leave. He had said he only wanted me to have a life with less pressure. It took me years to understand that he had made my shrinking sound like love. That afternoon, Tessa Kim leaned against my cubicle wall and asked whether I wanted to join the team for lunch. I almost said yes. Then I pictured Graham checking the shared credit card statement and asking why I had spent $14 at a restaurant instead of eating the lunch I had packed. I told Tessa I had too much work. She smiled without making me explain. "We'll still ask next time." The kindness in that sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. When I got home, Graham was in the shower. Water struck the tile behind the closed bathroom door steady and loud enough to cover small sounds. I went to the kitchen and reached behind a row of tea tins for an old metal coffee can. It had once held a dark roast Graham disliked. That was why I had chosen it. Inside was $1,460 in cash folded into small bundles. Most of it had come from $20 withdrawals made during grocery runs. There was also an encrypted USB drive, copies of my birth certificate and passport, an unactivated bank card, and a list of small apartments I had found around Charlotte. On the back of an old receipt, I had written the number for a domestic violence hotline. I had called once in March. A woman answered, and I hung up before she finished saying hello. I had created a private email account Graham did not know existed. I used it to store photographs of bruises, screenshots of messages, copies of personal documents, and the names of 2 attorneys I had never contacted. I had looked at apartments in Dilworth and Plaza Midwood. I had calculated deposits, application fees, moving costs, and the weeks I might miss work. The numbers never worked. Not yet. I was not waiting because I wanted to stay. I was waiting because leaving without enough money, enough evidence, or a safe place could make everything worse. Graham knew where my parents lived. He knew my work schedule. He had access to our joint accounts and every card I used. I did not need courage. I needed a door that would stay open long enough for me to get through it. My phone rang while I was putting the coffee can back. It was my mother. Lenora Calloway lived with my father in Hendersonville, about 2 hours away. Her voice sounded brighter than it had in months. Silas was coming home. My uncle had left the United States in 2011 for what was supposed to be a 2-year contract. 2 years became 5, then 9, then 14. He moved between energy construction and infrastructure projects in places I mostly knew through brief calls and photographs. Silas had taught me to swim when I was a child. He had repaired my first car in my parents' driveway. When I got stranded during a winter storm in college, he had driven 3 hours to pick me up without mentioning the inconvenience once. He had never used a favor to create a debt. Lenora said his flight would land in Charlotte that weekend and that he might stay for good. I should have felt only happiness. Instead, something tight formed beneath my ribs. Silas noticed things. That had always made me feel safe. Now, it terrified me. Graham came home that evening carrying a bottle of expensive scotch. He held it up like a trophy and said he wanted to impress the legendary uncle he had heard so much about. He was smiling when he placed his hand on my shoulder. My sleeve shifted. I caught the cuff before it slid high enough to expose the bruise. Graham's eyes moved to my hand. He did not ask why I had reacted so quickly. He asked how long Silas planned to stay. I said I was not sure. Possibly a few months, maybe longer. The smile remained, but something behind it changed. Have you told him about our financial situation? I looked at him. What financial situation? His expression softened too quickly. Nothing you need to worry about. I'm handling it. He kissed my forehead and walked toward the kitchen. That was how Graham worked. He gave me a reason to be afraid, then acted as if the fear had come from inside me. The following morning, I opened the cabinet and stopped. The coffee can had been turned around. I always kept the label facing the wall. Graham entered the kitchen while I was still staring at it. He poured water into the coffee maker, then glanced at the shelf. Do you still use that old stuff? Sometimes. He reached past me and picked up the can. My body went cold. He shook it once. The USB drive tapped against the metal. Graham frowned. His phone rang before he could remove the lid. He looked at the screen, set the can on the counter, and stepped onto the balcony. The glass door did not close completely. I heard pieces of his voice through the gap. Friday. Not from that account. I said, I'll fix it. I moved before I could think. I opened the can, took the USB drive and every document and pushed them into my work bag. I left the cash inside. If the can suddenly felt too light, Graham might know. When he returned, I was standing at the sink with my back to him. My phone buzzed on the counter. Lenora had sent Silas's flight information. I looked at the message, then at the bag near my feet. For months, I had believed I was preparing for a future escape. That morning, with Graham only a few steps behind me, I understood that I might have days instead. Chapter 2. How He Made My World Smaller. The first time Graham made my world smaller, I mistook it for attention. I met him in October 2017 at a networking event in Uptown Charlotte. I was working for Meridian Assurance then, still young enough to believe competence could protect me from most bad decisions, and old enough to think I could recognize danger when it entered a room. Graham did not enter loudly. He stood near the edge of a conversation, listened before speaking, and remembered details other people forgot. When I mentioned my mother lived in Hendersonville, he asked about her the next time we met. When I told him I hated crowded restaurants, he chose a quiet place for our first date. He never talked over me in those early months. He made me feel heard. At the time, I had my own apartment, my own savings, and a career I had built without anyone's permission. Mara Ellison was my closest friend and one of the few people who could challenge me without making me defensive. My mother met Graham the following spring. After he left, Lenora stood at the kitchen counter and said there was something almost too polished about him. Not false exactly, just difficult to read. I laughed and told her she was suspicious because I was serious about someone for the first time. She did not push. Years later, she told me she had been afraid that if she criticized him too strongly, I would move closer to him just to prove she was wrong. Graham and I became engaged in September 2018. We married in October 2019. The first changes were small enough to defend. He called when I worked late because he worried about me driving home tired. He asked what I planned to wear to company events because he wanted us to look good together. He became quiet when I mentioned lunch with a male colleague, then apologized and said he had never cared enough about anyone to feel jealous before. He did not tell me to stop seeing Mara. He told me Mara did not respect marriage. He pointed out every time she invited me somewhere without including him. He said she treated me like I was still single. He asked why she always seemed to need me when he and I had plans. Each complaint sounded reasonable by itself. That was how he built the walls, one brick at a time. In 2021, Meridian offered me a promotion. The role came with a higher salary, a small team, and several short business trips each year. Graham opened champagne when I told him. For 2 days, he acted proud. Then he began asking questions. Who would travel with me? How many men would report to me? Whether the company expected married women to spend nights away from home with male colleagues. The evening before my final interview, he accused me of caring more about the title than our marriage. The argument lasted until nearly 2 a.m. I arrived at the interview with swollen eyes and a headache. A week later, during an executive meeting, Graham called 6 times. When I finally stepped out to answer, he said he only wanted to know when I would be home. That same month, he appeared without warning at a Meridian networking reception. I was speaking with a client near the bar. Graham smiled, shook the man's hand, and kept one arm around my waist for the rest of the evening. In the car, the smile disappeared. He said I had embarrassed him. I asked what I had done. He said the fact that I had to ask proved I enjoyed the attention. Mara came to my apartment the next afternoon. She listened while I defended him. Then she said he was not loving me too much. He was making my life smaller so he could feel larger inside it. I told her she did not understand compromise because she had never stayed in a serious relationship long enough to build a life with someone. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew they were cruel. Mara's face changed. She said she hoped I would remember the conversation when I was ready to be honest. I did not call her afterward. She stopped calling me. I declined the promotion. 6 months later, I left Meridian for Blue Haven. Graham told everyone it had been a joint decision. At family dinners, Marianne Vale praised me for knowing what mattered. Graham's mother had spent years organizing charitable events and protecting the family's public image. She could turn almost any discomfort into a lesson about grace. Men like Graham carry enormous pressure, she once told me. A good wife learns when to stop pushing. Owen Vale nodded as if she had stated a legal principle. Owen had retired from real estate law, but he still spoke as though every family conversation needed a ruling. I became the person who kept things smooth. I explained why Graham missed dinners. I remembered birthdays. I apologized when he drank too much. I laughed when he made cutting remarks and told people he was tired. I protected his reputation so consistently that I stopped noticing what it cost me. The first time he hit me was in December 2022 after a holiday party. A coworker had asked me about a reporting model. We talked for less than 5 minutes. At home, Graham accused me of flirting. I told him he was being ridiculous. He slapped me. The sound shocked me more than the pain. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Graham dropped to his knees. He cried. He said he did not recognize himself. He blamed the whiskey, the stress, the fear of losing me. He promised therapy. For 3 months, he became the man I had married. He cooked. He brought flowers. He left handwritten notes beside my coffee. He asked about my work and listened to the answers. I decided the slap had been an exception. The second time happened because I stopped at a grocery store without telling him. The third came after Mara sent me a birthday message. The peaceful periods became shorter. The apologies became more practiced. I learned the difference between the sound of Graham setting his keys down and throwing them. I learned to begin difficult sentences with reassurance. I learned that saying I was sorry could sometimes end an argument before it became something worse. By then, Graham also controlled the money. He suggested we deposit both salaries into one joint account so he could manage the budget efficiently. He handled the mortgage, cards, investments, and bills. Any purchase over $50 became a conversation. When I asked to see the full financial picture, he said my credit score had fallen because of an old card I had forgotten to pay. He never showed me the report. I had built a career interpreting financial risk, yet I could not explain my own household finances. The shame of that kept me silent longer than fear did. In July 2025, a notification appeared on Graham's phone while he was in the kitchen. Past due balance, $47,600. The account name included a cash advance service I recognized from internal banking reports. Several transactions had merchant codes commonly associated with online betting. I asked him what it was. His hand closed around my wrist. Mind your own business. His fingers tightened until I stopped speaking. Later, he apologized and said it was a temporary loan connected to a private project. I nodded as if I believed him. The next day at Blue Haven, Tessa mentioned the Employee Credit Monitoring Program. I waited until she left, then opened the portal. A joint line of credit for $18,000 appeared on my report. It had been opened 8 months earlier. The confirmation email was not mine. The phone number belonged to Graham. Nearly all the money had been withdrawn. I stared at the screen, trying to remember whether I had signed anything. I had no memory of agreeing to the account. That did not prove what Graham had done, but it proved how little I knew. I downloaded the report and sent it to my private email. When I got home, Graham was waiting in the kitchen. He asked whether I had checked my credit that day. I had not told him I planned to. I said no. He watched me long enough to make my skin prickle. "Silas will be here in 3 days," he said. "I do not want our private business turned into family gossip." The next morning, I bought the wrong coffee. Graham looked at the bag on the counter and asked why I never listened. I told him the store had been out of his brand. He shoved me. My side struck the edge of the kitchen island. Pain spread beneath my ribs so quickly that I could not breathe. Graham stepped back and stared at me. Then he said I had made it happen. Lenora called later that morning to remind me that Silas would land in 2 days. I stood in the bathroom and lifted my shirt. The bruise was already darkening along my side. For years I had built explanations before the marks fully formed. This time, looking at the shape spreading across my skin, I knew I might not be able to hide it from the one person who had always looked closely. Chapter 3. The Man Who Finally Looked Closely. The next morning, I packed the USB, drive my credit report, and copies of my personal documents into a canvas tote and drove to Hendersonville. I told Graham my mother needed help preparing the guest room for Silas. He barely looked up from his phone. "Be back before dinner." It sounded ordinary. It was not a request. The drive took a little over 2 hours. I kept both hands tight on the steering wheel because every turn pulled at the bruise along my ribs. My parents' house looked exactly as it had when I was growing up. White siding, green shutters, Peter's old truck in the driveway, and a wind chime Lenora refused to replace, even though half the metal tubes no longer made sound. I carried the tote inside and found my mother folding clean sheets in the guest room. She smiled when she saw me. Then I bent to place the bag on the floor. My sleeve slid back. Lenora saw the marks around my wrist. Her hand stopped moving. She did not gasp. She did not demand to know what I had done or how I had fallen. She walked to the bedroom door, closed it, and turned the lock. Then she faced me. "Are you safe if you go home tonight?" The question broke something open, not because it was dramatic, but because she had not asked whether Graham had done it. She had not asked why I stayed. She had asked about my safety as if it mattered more than the explanation. I sat on the edge of the bed and started crying. At first I could only tell her pieces. Graham had hit me before. It had started at the end of 2022. He controlled the accounts. There was a past due loan for $47,600. There was an $18,000 line of credit on my report that I did not remember approving. He tracked my schedule and noticed when I changed anything. I had hidden $1,460 in a coffee can. I had photographs, messages, and copies of documents. The more I said, the more ashamed I felt. I was a financial analyst who had lost control of her own finances. I was a grown woman sitting in her childhood bedroom trying to explain why she had kept returning to a man who hurt her. Lenora sat beside me. I should have told you sooner. No, I defended him. That is not the question. I ignored you when you said something felt wrong. She took my hand, carefully avoiding the bruised wrist. What matters is not who saw him clearly first. What matters is that you are alive and you still get to decide what happens next. The bedroom door opened before I could answer. Peter stood there. He must have heard enough from the hallway. His face had turned red. He put his hands on you. I looked down. Peter reached for his truck keys. I'm going to Charlotte. Fear moved through me faster than the pain in my ribs. No, he does not get to do this. If you go there, he will know I told you. Good. You do not understand. My voice came out sharper than I intended. He will not take it out on you. He will wait until you leave, and he will take it out on me. Peter froze. Lenora stepped between us. Protecting her does not mean turning this into a fight between you and Graham. Peter looked at me as if he wanted permission to become violent on my behalf. I could not give it to him. I need you not to go. His hand loosened around the keys. What do you need me to do? It was the right question, even though it took him a moment to ask it. I need somewhere to keep these. I showed him the tote. Peter nodded. I can do that. Lenora suddenly remembered something. The previous November, Graham had called their house looking for me. She had not answered, so he left a voicemail. She found it after several minutes of navigating menus on the old answering system attached to the kitchen phone. Graham's voice began softly. Tamsin, call me. Then the tone changed. If she's there, tell her to come home before this gets worse. Lenora looked sick. I thought you two had argued. We had. Why did I keep this? Because you never delete anything. That almost made her smile. I asked her not to forward it, edit it, or record it onto another device yet. Just leave it exactly where it is. She nodded. For the first time, the shame was mixed with something else. Relief. One other person knew. 2 days later, we stood in the arrivals area at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, waiting for Silas. I wore another cardigan. The bruise along my ribs was hidden, but the marks on my wrist had faded to a yellowed edge that makeup could not fully cover. Silas appeared, carrying one battered duffel and a hard-sided case covered in old airline stickers. Lenora reached him first. Peter hugged him next. Then Silas turned to me. He wrapped both arms around me, and I felt his hands pause against my back. You got smaller. I got older. So did I. I still take up the same amount of space. When he pulled away, my sleeve shifted. His eyes dropped to my wrist. I covered it. Silas did not ask in front of my parents. He looked at Lenora. She looked away. That was enough. On the way out, Silas said he wanted to ride back to Charlotte with me and finally meet Graham properly. Every part of me wanted to refuse, but Graham already knew Silas was arriving. If I showed up alone after promising otherwise, he would ask why. So I agreed. For the first half hour, Silas talked about airports contracts and how strange North Carolina roads felt after years away. Then his voice became quieter. Are you happy, Tam? I watched the highway. I'm tired. That was not what I asked. I know. He did not push. If the answer changes, you do not have to find a perfect way to tell me. When we reached the high-rise, Elaine Porter was waiting near the elevator, with a grocery bag in each hand. She smiled at Silas when I introduced them. Then she looked at me. You need to be more careful, honey. You are always bumping into something. She laughed as if it were harmless. I changed the subject. Silas did not. He looked at Elaine, then at me, but he said nothing until we reached the condo. Graham had prepared a small performance. Scotch on the counter, food arranged on serving boards, music low enough to suggest ease without demanding attention. He hugged me as soon as we entered. His hand settled on my shoulder. My body tightened before I could stop it. Silas noticed. Graham talked about the vacation we were supposedly planning. He said I worked too hard. He told Silas our finances were solid and that the South Park condo had been one of the smartest decisions we ever made. No one had asked about money. Whenever Silas directed a question toward me, Graham answered first. When he chose a chair, I waited before sitting. When he reached for the scotch bottle, I checked his face. When his hand touched my back, I held my breath. Silas watched all of it. Graham's phone rang and he stepped onto the balcony. Silas waited until the glass door closed. "Is there anyone in this home who makes you afraid?" The words were so direct that for 1 second I almost told him. Then the balcony door shifted. Graham was turning back toward us. "No." Silas held my gaze. "I will not force you, but I am here." Graham returned, smiling. An hour later, Silas left for my parents' house. Graham closed the door behind him and turned the lock. The smile disappeared. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. He was watching me." "He has never met you before. You made him suspicious." "I did not say anything." "That is the problem." He stepped closer. "You do not have to say anything. You just stand there, looking like a victim." I reached for my phone. Graham took it from my hand. I moved toward the door. He opened it just far enough for me to step into the hallway, then grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. The door slammed. He shoved me into the frame. Pain shot through the bruise along my side. When I doubled over, he struck the same area again. This time, I did not ask what I had done wrong. I did not apologize. I counted the distance between me and the door. I thought about how long his client meetings usually lasted. I thought about the tote in my parents' house and the documents Lenora had promised to keep. Graham looked at me as if waiting for the version of me who would calm him down. She did not appear. He left 20 minutes later, saying he had a client meeting and that we would finish the conversation when he returned. I locked the bathroom door. I photographed the marks on my wrist, shoulder, and ribs. Then I pulled the small bag from the back of the closet. My hands shook while I called Silas. He answered immediately. "You asked if I was okay." Silence. I lied. He waited. "Graham hits me. Tonight was not the first time." Silas took one slow breath. "Where is he?" "He left. He said he has a meeting." "What do you want me to do?" No one had asked me that before without already deciding the answer. I looked at the locked bathroom door, the bag beside my feet, and my reflection in the mirror. I want to get out before he comes back. Chapter 4. The day I stopped protecting him. Silas told me to stay on the phone while he called my parents from another line. He did not tell me to wait for him inside the condo. He did not promise to make Graham pay. He asked practical questions. "Is the door locked?" "Yes." "Do you have your medication and identification?" "I have some of it." "Can you turn off location sharing without alerting him?" I opened the settings with shaking fingers. "I think so." "Do that first. Then change the password to the email account he knows about." "Do not try to take everything." That last instruction mattered. For years I had imagined leaving as a complete act. Suitcases packed, drawers emptied, every important object carried safely through the door. The reality was a canvas bag, 3 changes of clothes, my medication, my laptop, and the documents I could reach without making noise. I turned off location sharing. I changed my main email password and switched my phone to airplane mode after sending Silas the garage level and elevator number. Lenora stayed on a second call while Peter drove toward Charlotte. My father wanted to come upstairs. I told him no. If Graham returns, call the police. Do not confront him. Peter went quiet. Then he said, "I'll be where you need me." Silas reached the garage first. He waited near the elevator instead of coming to the condo. That was my choice. I stood in the entryway with my bag over one shoulder and looked back at the rooms I had spent years maintaining. The cream sofa Graham had chosen. The framed wedding photograph in which I looked certain of my future. The kitchen island where my ribs still throbbed. I had once believed leaving would feel like courage. It felt like nausea. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and closed it behind me. No one carried me out. No one pulled me toward the elevator. I walked. Silas was waiting when the doors opened. His face changed when he saw how I was holding my side, but he did not ask to see the injury. He took the laptop bag after I handed it to him. "Your mother is waiting downstairs." "Where is Dad?" "Across the street in his truck." "Good," Silas nodded. "You made the plan. We follow it." Graham did not return before we left South Park. The next morning was when his perfect life began to come apart. Not all at once. There was no dramatic arrest outside the condo and no single phone call that destroyed everything he had built. Instead, the systems that had protected him began to close, one by one. At Queen City Urgent Care, Dr. Neil Harmon examined the bruising along my ribs, the marks around my wrist, and the swelling near my shoulder. He asked when each injury had happened. I answered slowly. He documented my words without turning them into something more dramatic. "Do you feel safe returning home?" "No." "Are you planning to return today?" "No." Saying it the second time felt different. The medical record did not make my pain real. It made the pain harder for Graham to explain away. A woman named Daphne Ruiz met us in a private room before I left the clinic. She worked with Safe Harbor Charlotte and spoke in a calm voice that never made me feel rushed. She asked whether Graham had access to my phone accounts, banking information, vehicle, or workplace schedule. The answer was yes to almost everything. Daphne helped me check for shared devices and tracking permissions. She told me to change my banking PIN from a device Graham had never used. She helped me prepare instructions for Blue Haven, so only Tessa and one human resources manager would know where I was staying. She also told me not to post anything online. "Leaving does not always end the control," she said. "Sometimes it makes the person controlling you feel more desperate to get it back." I looked at Silas. He had been silent for most of the meeting. Daphne noticed. "Who makes the decisions from here?" "I do," I said. Silas answered at the same time. "She does." That afternoon I met Adrienne Shaw. She was a family law attorney who handled domestic violence cases and financial control. She did not promise that every judge would believe me or that the process would be quick. She explained what could happen next. We could request an ex parte domestic violence protective order. If granted, it would temporarily restrict Graham from contacting or approaching me. A fuller hearing would usually follow within about a week. She also explained that separation and divorce were not the same thing in North Carolina. You have to live separate and apart for at least 1 year before an absolute divorce can be completed. A year. Yes, but property debt support and protective orders can be addressed while that year is running. I asked about the condo. Adrienne shook her head before I finished. His name being on the deed does not automatically answer every marital property question. But do not make assumptions in either direction. Then she asked what financial documents I had. I told her about the credit report, the loan notification, and the papers still inside the condo. "You may preserve records you legally have access to," she said. "You may not enter his company's systems, guess passwords, or take confidential business files simply because you suspect misconduct." I understood. For the first time, someone was helping me build a case without asking me to become someone reckless. Within 48 hours, Adrienne filed for an ex parte protective order. Graham's messages began before he was formally served. First came concern. "Please tell me you are safe." Then regret. I am ashamed of how I reacted. Then blame. "Silas came home and poisoned everything." Then reassurance. "The credit account is an administrative mistake. I can explain it." Finally, the threat underneath all the others appeared. "If you continue this, you will lose the condo, your professional reputation, and any chance of fixing what you have done." I did not answer. I saved every message. Owen Vale called that evening. He said Graham was devastated and that Silas was encouraging me to turn a private marital dispute into a property fight. Marianne called next. A marriage should not end over one terrible night. I looked at the bruises along my wrist. It was not one night. Marianne was silent. Then she said Graham was under pressure. For years I would have comforted her. I would have softened the facts so she did not have to see her son clearly. This time, I ended the call. Adrian later notified Owen and Marianne that they were not to contact me on Graham's behalf. Several days later, I returned to the condo at a scheduled time to collect more personal belongings. Graham was not present. Peter and Silas came with me, but both followed the limits Adrian had set. Peter carried boxes. Silas stayed near the doorway. Neither man searched Graham's office. In a shared drawer containing mortgage records and household tax documents, I found the loan paperwork for $47,600, several cash advance statements, and a list of vendor payments mixed with our personal files. One receipt showed money entering Graham's personal account on the same day a payment left Hartwell Infrastructure Group for a vendor I did not recognize. Silas studied the project code. "This looks unusual. Does it prove anything?" "No," he handed it back. "It means someone qualified should look at it." Adrian introduced us to Miles Brennan, a forensic accountant. Miles reviewed only the documents I had a legal right to possess. He said the records did not prove embezzlement. They did show dates, amounts, and a vendor relationship that Hartwell's compliance department should examine. Adrian sent the information through a formal channel. No threats, no public accusations, no demand that Graham be fired. At Hartwell, the information reached Rhea Morgan, the company's controller and compliance manager. What we did not know was that Rhea had already been reviewing suspicious vendor payments since February. Avery Holt, the company's executive vice president, had warned her not to create a crisis around a man who brought in major clients. The date on my receipt matched a transaction already in her file. The documents I found had not created the suspicion. They connected it to Graham's personal debt. Rhea requested an independent audit. Before the protective order hearing, Graham appeared in the Blue Haven parking lot. He did not shout. He stood several yards from the entrance with both hands visible and told the security guard he only wanted 5 minutes with his wife. Tessa saw him before I did. She took my arm and guided me away from the glass doors. "You do not have to go outside." Graham called my name through the entrance. "I just want to save our marriage." Security called the police. The incident was documented as a possible violation of the temporary restrictions. Graham kept insisting he had done nothing threatening. That was what he had always depended on, the belief that if he spoke calmly enough, no one would notice the control inside the words. By the end of that day, Graham had been served with the legal papers. Rhea had also submitted a request to freeze his authority to approve vendor payments while the audit proceeded. Avery resisted. Rhea did not. "If we protect revenue by ignoring the records," she told him, "then this is no longer one man's misconduct." Graham called Owen and said I was destroying his life. When Adrian told me, she did not smile. He still believes every consequence begins with you. I looked at the saved messages, the urgent care record, and the hearing date set for the following week. "No," I said. "They began with him." Adrian nodded. "Exactly." Chapter 5. The Life He Could No Longer Control. The hearing took place 9 days after I left the condo. Graham arrived in a navy suit with a lawyer beside him. He looked rested, controlled, and almost offended by the room itself. His attorney described me as overwhelmed by work, influenced by my uncle, and confused about a marriage under temporary strain. He said bruises did not identify who caused them. He said Graham had gone to Blue Haven because he wanted to save his marriage, not frighten me. Adrian presented the urgent care record, the photographs, Graham's messages, Lenora's voicemail, and the police report from the parking lot. Then I was asked to speak. I did not tell the court every cruel thing Graham had ever said. I did not try to make him look monstrous. I told the truth. Graham had hit me more than once. I had hidden it because I was afraid of what would happen if he knew I had told anyone. I did not want him approaching my home, my work, or my family. Graham watched me as if he expected my voice to fail. It did not. The judge extended the protective order. That decision did not erase my fear, but it changed its authority. For the first time, Graham's claim to me was weaker than my right to be left alone. 3 weeks later, Adrian obtained preserved footage from the hallway outside our condo. The camera had not recorded what happened inside. It showed Graham blocking the elevator, taking my phone, and pulling me back by the wrist. The timestamp matched the photographs and the urgent care report. Elaine Porter gave a statement about the things she had seen over the years. The bruises, the way I avoided the elevator when Graham was near it, the night she heard something strike the wall. She admitted she had always chosen the easiest explanation. She had thought marriage was private. I wondered how many women remained invisible because the people around them preferred privacy to discomfort. Assistant District Attorney Camille Reed met with me through the Mecklenburg County Prosecutor's Office. She was careful about what the evidence could and could not prove. The assault evidence, the protective order violation, and the financial conduct in my name were separate from the investigation at Hartwell. Not every terrible act would be placed into one dramatic trial. Each allegation had to stand on its own records. Camille never asked Silas what punishment he wanted. She never asked Peter whether Graham deserved prison. She asked me what happened, what I had saved, and what I could testify to honestly. That distinction mattered. By August, I had moved into a small apartment in Dilworth. It did not have floor-to-ceiling windows or a concierge. The kitchen was narrow, and the bedroom faced an alley where delivery trucks arrived before sunrise. It was mine. I opened an account Graham could not access. I changed every password. I checked my credit myself. Then I called Mara Ellison. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near her office. I apologized for pushing her away, defending Graham, and using her personal life against her when she tried to warn me. Mara listened without interrupting. She believed me. She was also hurt. She said losing me had not become painless simply because she finally understood why it happened. We did not repair years of silence in one conversation. We agreed to start with coffee. Mara later gave Adrian old emails and call logs showing how often Graham disrupted my work, especially before the promotion I had declined. She never claimed to have witnessed violence she had not seen. She spoke only about the control she had observed and the person I had gradually stopped being. I began therapy that same month. In October 2025, Blue Haven offered me a risk analysis position. It was not the title I once expected to have, but it required judgment, technical skill, and a voice in the room. During my second month, I found an error in a commercial lending model that understated exposure across several accounts. A manager challenged my conclusion. For one terrible second, I felt Graham's voice inside my head, telling me not to embarrass anyone, not to sound difficult, not to create a problem. Then I explained the numbers again. The model was corrected. No one punished me for being right. I went home that evening and cried in my car. Not because I was afraid, but because I had recognized myself. At Hartwell, the audit lasted about 10 weeks. Rhea Morgan, Caleb Finch, and an outside audit team traced nearly $286,000 through false reimbursements, altered vendor descriptions, and payments approved outside normal procedures. Caleb confirmed Graham's access and approval history. Rhea confirmed that compliance concerns had begun months before I left him. The records I found had not created the misconduct. They had connected Graham's personal debt to a pattern Hartwell was already investigating. Avery Holt eventually authorized the company to turn the findings over to state authorities. Graham was suspended, then terminated. The financial case moved through North Carolina's state system. Camille remained my point of contact for the personal charges, while a financial crimes prosecutor handled the corporate records. Rhea and Caleb testified about transactions. Elaine testified about the hallway. Lenora preserved the voicemail. Mara described the career pressure she had witnessed. Dr. Evelyn Cross briefly explained how coercive control and financial dependence could make an educated, employed woman delay reporting abuse. No single witness knew everything. Together, they made it impossible for Graham to control the story. Owen defended his son until Graham's own attorney explained, the credit line opened in my name, the access records, the protective order violation, and the audit findings. Marianne sent me a letter saying she was sorry, followed by a request that our families someday heal together. I did not answer. She still wanted unity more than she wanted to understand the boundary I had drawn. I no longer believed I owed anyone access to me because they regretted losing it. Graham and I remained legally separated for more than a year as North Carolina required. During that time, Adrian handled the condo, the disputed debt, retirement funds, and the line of credit. The condo had been purchased in 2020 for about $515,000 and still carried a mortgage of roughly $362,000. I did not receive the entire property. Graham did not get to pretend all the equity belonged only to him. I received my lawful share of the marital assets, enough to stabilize my apartment, pay legal costs, and establish a modest emergency fund. None of the money tied to the Hartwell fraud became part of my future. After the required year of separation, the absolute divorce was completed in late summer 2026. By then, Graham had lost his position and faced consequences for both the financial misconduct and the conduct he had continued after I left. His collapse was not one grand act of revenge. It was a series of doors closing because he kept choosing to walk through them. He later sent a letter through his lawyer. He apologized for frightening me. He said gambling had taken control of his life. He said pressure had turned him into someone he did not recognize. He wrote that he had entered counseling. Then he blamed Silas for arriving at the worst possible time. He blamed my family for escalating things. Even inside his apology, he was still searching for someone else to carry part of what he had done. I did not respond. Refusing forgiveness did not mean I lived in anger. It meant I no longer needed to make Graham feel better about the truth. By early fall, I still checked my locks twice. A door slamming in the hallway could tighten every muscle in my body. I slept badly before court dates. Mara and I were rebuilding something new, rather than pretending the old friendship had never been damaged. But I also had my own account, my own credit, and a growing emergency fund. I wore short sleeves. I went to lunch with Tessa without explaining where I was going. I called my parents because I wanted to hear their voices, not because I needed someone to rescue me. Silas opened a small risk consulting firm near Charlotte. He stayed close without watching over every choice I made. Peter asked before installing a better lock. Lenora helped me hang pictures and let me decide where they belonged. One evening, I heard footsteps outside my apartment. My body went still. A door slammed. I waited for Graham's key in the lock. It never came. There was no message asking where I had been, no voice demanding that I explain myself, no man entering the room and forcing me to study his face before deciding how much space I was allowed to occupy. There was only the apartment I had chosen. On a shelf near the kitchen sat the old coffee can. It no longer held hidden cash. Inside were the useless key to the South Park condo and a new credit report with no secret account attached to my name. The next morning, I put on a short-sleeved blouse, locked my door, and walked downstairs to meet Mara. She had saved me a seat. Graham once made my world so small that I thought freedom was only a door opening at the right moment. But freedom was not the day I left his condo. It was the day I understood that no one else would ever decide which doors I was allowed to walk through. Have you ever watched someone slowly disappear inside a relationship and wondered how to help without taking away their choices? Tell me which warning sign you think people overlook most, and subscribe for more stories about women who reclaimed their lives through truth, courage, and justice.